Since you can't even do household chores properly, you might as well just keep working forever. Haha.
I couldn't help but get angry at those words. After all, it was Tony who had been against me working in the first place. I couldn't believe his nerve after getting jealous when I became a supervisor and then annoying me when my salary increased. And now he's telling me to just keep working. How dare you?
What's up? Got a complaint? If you have a complaint, then just do whatever you please.
Realizing I was irritated, Tony retorted with a frown. Fine, I'll do as I please. In a tit-for-tat response, I said that and then went to bed in a sulk. I was furious with Tony, but work wasn't going to wait for me. The next day, I went to work and immediately requested a meeting with the department head. As I had declared to Tony, I'll do as I please, I decided to take on a project that had been proposed to me earlier. My name is Cindy Yale, and I'm 30 years old. About 3 years ago, I married Tony, who's the same age as me. We don't have kids yet, so we are both working hard as dual-income couple. In the past, many people thought that once a woman got married, she should stay at home, but those days are gone. Although we work at different companies, we both are employed full-time and help each other with household chores. Generally, Tony handles the laundry and cleaning, while I mainly take care of the meals, trying to serve beautiful dishes to Tony since the beginning of our marriage. At work, too, I strive to perform, and I was recently promoted to a position as a supervisor. With this promotion, both the quantity and quality of my work have increased. However, Tony, who is still a regular employee at his company, failed to understand my situation.
Didn't we have this for dinner yesterday? Aren't you being a bit ignorant with dinner lately? Please do it properly.
One evening at dinner, Tony said this. Tony hasn't had a promotion yet, and he's still just a regular employee. Perhaps frustrated that his wife, me, received a promotion before him, he didn't celebrate my promotion. Since I became a supervisor, he started nagging every day. Of course, I have less free time than before, but I still manage the household chores we've divided up just as I used to. I understand that his nagging stems from jealousy, which is why I feel I must treat carefully. Sorry, I do the prep in the morning, but I can't help but be late preparing dinner when I get back. So I've been making simple dishes lately.
Simple dishes? So you're saying it's okay to eat the same thing every day?
That's not what I'm saying.
Don't make excuses. After all, you were the one who said you'd handle the meals when we got married, right? The women at my company managed to take care of household chores even while raising children. You always say that.
I couldn't say anything back. Of course, there are such people at Tony's company, but it's pointless to compare us to other families. Moreover, the woman Tony always mentions is, I believe, a part-time worker. I don't look down on people with part-time jobs, but being compared in that way feels somewhat off. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm being generous, so I'll forgive you.
When I apologized, Tony started eating again. I wish he would just eat quietly, but there's nothing I can do about it. When I talked about Tony with a friend, she suggested I think of it as practice for when raising a kid. Indeed, watching Tony sometimes makes me feel like I'm dealing with a child. Complimenting him is my only option. Oh, right. You did the laundry, didn't you? Thank you.
Huh? Yeah. It's obvious, isn't it? Without me, the house wouldn't function at all.
I swallowed what I wanted to say and praised Tony, who seemed pleased. Indeed, Tony does the household chores as agreed. However, even when doing the laundry, he doesn't look at the labels or use a mesh bag. He just throws everything in, presses one button to wash and dry. Sometimes Tony complains about clothes shrinking or getting pilled. If that counts as properly doing the chores, I wonder how well I'm really doing. But I never expressed dissatisfaction with Tony. Once when I did express dissatisfaction, it led to a huge argument.
Then you should quit your job and take care of everything. That's why I said so when we got married. I shouldn't have listened to what you said, Cindy.
Tony yelled at me, hurled insults, and then we didn't speak for about 2 weeks. During that time, he didn't do his share of the work, and I had to handle everything. It's better for me to endure some things than to suffer so much emotionally and physically. Indeed, Tony was originally not supportive of my job.
When a married woman goes out to work, it never ends well. That's what my sister said. That's why I want you to stay at home.
I don't know what Tony's sister meant by that, but if that's what Tony wants, I was prepared to do so. But it turned out that we couldn't live on Tony's salary alone. It wasn't a situation where we could live on ideals alone. So I insisted on continuing to work desperately. My company is a major firm with good pay. If both of us worked, we might have a bit more breathing room. Tony agreed reluctantly, and that's how our current situation came about. Despite being a bit sloppy, Tony does share the household chores. That much is true and helps me a lot. As Tony's birthday approached, I had never given him a lavish celebration since we got married. For his birthday, I had always celebrated with my home-cooked meals. But this year, with my increased salary as a supervisor, I decided to celebrate his birthday with a hotel dinner. When I bought the gift and the day arrived, Tony's eyes widened in surprise as he relished the course meal.
This is the first time I've had such delicious food. But are we okay with money?
It's a special occasion. It's your birthday. I got a raise since I became a supervisor and we'll cut back a little from now on. So, no more complaints about the simple dishes I make, okay? We joked like that and ended the day. But I did notice Tony's smirk that day. A few days later, he started to ask persistently.
Hey, you said your salary went up, right? How much did it increase by? You're a supervisor now, so it must have been a significant raise, right?
Before his birthday, supervisor seemed like a forbidden word. We never mentioned it, but as soon as he heard about the salary increase, his attitude changed rapidly.
Being a supervisor is impressive. It's all because of Cindy's hard work.
He started to praise me. Initially, I couldn't keep up with his sudden change and just smiled awkwardly, but he kept pestering me about the salary. I continued to completely ignore his inquiries. But when I kept ignoring him, he started to sulk.
What? Getting cocky because you're just a supervisor? You think you're better than me because I'm just a regular employee at a smaller company, don't you?
It was really annoying. I splurged because it was your birthday. I'm not rich, so please stop talking about money. After scolding him like that, he finally calmed down a bit, but it was clear that Tony was fixated on my money. I regretted becoming a supervisor and even celebrating his birthday. I had some regrets, but it wasn't all bad. After becoming a supervisor, I was entrusted with a big project. Although it meant even more overtime, Tony was supportive.
Cindy, you're a supervisor and you're busy. I'll do what I can.
And he started preparing dinner, even if it was just supermarket-ready meals. Maybe that birthday had its meaning after all, as it made him more cooperative. And when that busy period finally settled down, Tony said with excitement in his eyes.
So, you were busy, right? You must be getting a special bonus, right?
I was shocked at his words. No, there's no bonus. Why would there be a bonus? I was too tired to argue. Then Tony lost his temper.
Huh? Working overtime for months and no bonus? What was the point of me helping out? What a lousy company you work for.
I had no energy to counter that. The point of him helping out? Is there supposed to be a point to a couple helping each other out? I couldn't believe he would insult someone else's company. I couldn't hold back at that moment. Huh? I was grateful that you were helping out, but is that how you really see this? That's disappointing. We exchanged words again, and eventually it escalated into an argument. Enough, let's stop. I'm tired and going to bed. I forcefully ended the conversation like that. For a while after, I couldn't even stand to look at Tony's face. Then I had to go on a business trip. We hadn't spoken since the argument, but I had to inform him since I would be leaving the house. I have a business trip coming up. I'll be gone for 3 days. Please take care of the house while I'm gone. I said this, but Tony, still angry, didn't respond. Without reconciling, I left for the trip. Those 3 days were busy with work, but in between work, I wondered how Tony was doing. Was he eating properly? I was worried, but my pride prevented me from reaching out. The time apart allowed me to cool down. I decided to apologize when I got home. After finishing the 3 days of work, I bought some tasty souvenirs and started my journey back home. I'm home. However, as soon as I entered the entrance hall, I sensed something was off. There were several unfamiliar shoes in the shoe cabinet. Moreover, there was a delicious smell coming from the kitchen. It was definitely the smell of homemade food, and I knew Tony couldn't cook. I hurried into the living room. Ah, Cindy, welcome back. Alyssa, what are you doing here? Standing in the kitchen, visible from the living room, was Tony's sister, Alyssa. and Katie, Tony's niece, was lounging on the sofa. If it were just a visit, that would be one thing, but it was clear that more belongings had been brought into our home. This sofa, for instance, hadn't been here before I went on my business trip. I stood at the entrance to the living room, stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. "We're just about ready for dinner," Alyssa said nonchalantly. Despite my shock, I walked over to Tony, who was sitting at the dining table, and spoke to him. "Tony, what's going on?"
What do you mean? I decided to live with my sister Alyssa and her daughter Katie. The move is already finished.
Tony said this as if it were the most natural thing.
"That's right. So go on. Please make yourself at home."
Alyssa also said this with a smile, but I was far from able to smile at this situation. Bringing in Alyssa and Katie's belongings and deciding to live together with them without consulting me was not something to be decided all on his own. Wait a minute, you can't just decide this on your own.
What's the problem? You're always too busy with overtime to do any housework, so it's better if we live together and have my sister take care of the chores.
Tony retorted when I tried to argue. Alyssa had Katie when she was 20 and divorced a few years later. Since then, she had been raising Katie alone, and Katie was now 18. I knew about this, and I knew that Tony admired his significantly older sister Alyssa. However, I had never imagined it would lead to us living together.
"Cindy, please understand."
Alyssa seemed to have no reservations, and Katie said in a small voice,
"Please understand."
My head hurt, but I couldn't just silently accept the situation. "I'm sorry, but I can't live together with you all like this." I stated this clearly. However, Tony just laughed at me as if he was mocking me.
Why? Since you can't even manage the housework properly, you might as well just keep working.
I was infuriated by his words. Originally, it was Tony who had opposed my working. Being envied for becoming a supervisor, then targeted for a salary increase, and now being told to just keep working, it was unbelievable. How dare you?
What, got a complaint? If you have a complaint, then just do whatever you please.
It seemed Tony sensed my irritation and retorted angrily. Fine, I'll do as I please. But I was the one who wanted to be angry. In a tit-for-tat response, I said that to Tony. After that, we stopped talking and I went to sleep. Alyssa and Katie, having apparently given up their own home, naturally slept in the beds they had brought in. The spare room that was supposed to be a children's room was taken over by the two of them, and I was more sad than angry. Yet work waited for no one. The next day, as soon as I got to the office, I immediately requested a meeting with the department head. I decided to take on a project that had been previously suggested.
That's great. I appreciate you taking it on.
This is a good opportunity, so I'll work hard for myself. After making a promise with the department head, I immersed myself in work. I found it more bearable to be at work than to be home because I couldn't forgive Tony. A few days later, this happened.
Hey, Cindy, how long are you going to sulk? Come back home already.
Tony contacted me with that message. Although I had been going home, it was only after everyone was asleep, and I would leave before anyone woke up. However, these past few days, I haven't gone home at all. That's because I had set up a new place to live. You tell me to come home, but I can't just come back immediately.
Can't come back immediately? What do you mean?
I'm in Cancun now. It's midnight here. Besides, your sister can take care of the household chores even if I don't come back, right?
Huh?
As I yawned while I said this, Tony seemed momentarily breathless. I had just finished work and was returning home, and talking to Tony was just exhausting. Finally understanding the situation, Tony suddenly shouted,
Huh? Cancun? You went on a trip without telling us?
It's not a trip. I've been living here for the past 3 days.
What are you talking about?
But the next words I spoke seemed to confuse Tony again. Had he already forgotten that he told me to do as I please? I could imagine a flustered Tony on the other end of the phone, and I said while laughing, What do you mean? You were the one who said do as you please, and I said I would. That's why I accepted the assignment to move to Cancun that had been proposed before. They even prepared a mansion for me here, and it's a really wonderful place.
But there's a limit, right? This involves both of our lives, and you decided this on your own.
Tony seemed quite upset. Surely if we had discussed it, he would have said that we should move here together. However, this assignment in Cancun was like a prize for the achievements I made at my previous job. I think it's Tony's fault for getting angry about not getting a special bonus and not listening to other things. Also, doesn't he feel any incongruity in saying that? He decided on his own to live with Alyssa and Katie, affecting both of our lives. That's quite a boomerang. Did you consult me when you decided for us to live together with Alyssa and Katie?
That's...
I'll be working here, and in 2 years I'll return to the US as a manager. Until then, live well with your sister and her daughter. I said this and hung up the phone. Tony must be feeling restless now. His own reckless actions and missteps have made it impossible for him to live overseas. A few days later, Tony contacted me again. I answered the phone wondering what it was this time, and he sounded cheerful.
Guess where I am right now?
I don't know, and I'm hanging up because I'm at work.
I'm right in front of your mansion.
I was shocked by his words. When I asked for details, he told me he had contacted the company and found out my address. If a husband claims it's necessary for procedures, the company had to provide it. And based on that address, he had come all the way here on his own. What about your job?
I took some time off to come here, and...
Yoo-hoo, I'm here too.
To my surprise, I heard Alyssa's voice on the phone. Why has she come too? I was at my wit's end.
So that's the situation. We're both waiting for you. Hurry back.
What about Katie?
Katie has a test, so she's not coming.
Alyssa said this nonchalantly. I was just astonished again. I see, but I won't be coming back today. I have a dinner meeting to go to. Even if they contact me, I'm not in the mood to host them, and it's not possible to accommodate such a sudden visit. I had no plans to return home today because I was attending a social gathering with another company.
What? Then what are we supposed to do?
Tony sounded panicked. But that wasn't my concern. Why don't you stay at a hotel? Anyway, that's the situation. I'm at work right now. Bye. I said this and hung up the phone. They might be making a fuss, but I don't have time to deal with it. They'll probably give up and look for a hotel. However, my assumption was too optimistic. During the social gathering, my phone rang. Excuse me. I excused myself from the table and answered the phone. When I saw an unfamiliar number, I was puzzled, but it turned out to be a call from the police. What? A burglar? Apparently there was an intruder at my house, looking for an open window. They found a pet door. I didn't have pets, so I hadn't noticed, but it seems the house built by my company had one. Of course, I hadn't even known about such a feature, so it wasn't locked. The intruder had tried to enter through it and got stuck, unable to move forward or back, and someone passing by had called the police. What a foolish burglar. Such a fool could be dangerous if encountered. I was truly relieved I wasn't home today. Then the moment came.
This person claims to be your sister. Do you know her?
I went pale at those words. Sister? Could her name possibly be... I don't have a sister. The only possibility is Tony's sister, Alyssa. As expected, the police read out her name. It was embarrassingly pathetic. It's shameful to think that a family member would try to forcibly enter through such a place.
Cindy, help! Come and get me!
I could hear Alyssa's commotion over the phone. What a nuisance. Although I could have gone to pick her up, I told the police. She is indeed my sister-in-law, but I can't forgive her for trying to enter my house without permission. Please investigate thoroughly what she intended to do in my house. The police responded to my complaint. Later, I heard that Alyssa was severely scolded. However, due to her inability to speak Spanish, there was a lot of confusion as they couldn't understand each other. Alyssa, overwhelmed by the uncertainty of her situation and the stress of not being able to communicate, reportedly broke down crying.
You shouldn't trouble your sister-in-law anymore.
The police officer told her this in broken English, to which Alyssa tearfully repeated,
Sí, sí.
Being arrested in Cancun might have been a good lesson for her. I decided to let Alyssa truly reflect and did not go to pick her up that day. The next day, thinking she must have reflected enough, I went to get her. Seeing my face, Alyssa broke down in tears of relief. By the way, where was Tony? Tony was probably relaxing in some hotel, a detail I hadn't bothered to think about. It was later revealed that while Alyssa was being detained, Tony was enjoying a meal alone. Believing Alyssa's claim that she would bring money from my house, Tony indulged in eating and drinking at a restaurant first. He didn't know Alyssa got stuck in the pet door and was arrested. Instead, he passed out drunk in the restaurant. The restaurant, troubled by his unresponsiveness, called the police, and when Tony woke up, he found himself in an unfamiliar police station. However, since my house and the restaurant were in different jurisdictions, Tony was taken to a different police station than Alyssa.
My wallet's gone. And my passport. Where's my phone?
Unfortunately, while he took a nap, his bag was stolen and he lost his wallet, passport, and phone. Like Alyssa, Tony, who doesn't speak Spanish, was arrested for not paying his bill and was unable to seek help, ending up under police care. This was only discovered after Alyssa was released.
Where's Tony?
I first learned of Tony's disappearance when Alyssa, always a nuisance, asked about him. I went to the restaurant where they were supposed to meet, learned the details from the owner, and found out that Tony had been taken away by the police.
Alyssa! Cindy!
When we visited the police station, Tony, looking pale, broke down crying and called our names. Frustrated by the déjà vu, I sighed. I explained the situation to the restaurant owner, paid for the damages, and apologized. Given the theft, the owner pitied Tony and decided not to pursue the matter of not paying. But the aftermath was challenging. At the police station, we went through the process for reporting a lost passport and contacted the consulate. I couldn't focus on work because of Alyssa and Tony's issues. When my irritation was about to explode, Tony said,
"Oh, I thought it was the end for me, but I'm glad it all worked out."
Yeah, thank goodness it's all good now. Let's go back to Cindy's house for now.
Their carefree words finally made me snap. Nothing about this is good for me. How can you say that after causing so much trouble for others?
Well, yeah, I admit that was bad, but...
Go back to your own home, and don't ever come here again. Both were silenced by my stern voice.
But...
I'll prepare the divorce papers this weekend.
Divorce papers?
Tony shouted, and Alyssa next to him looked shocked as she glanced back and forth between Tony and me. There's no benefit to me in staying married to you, Tony, and your sister moved in without letting me know. You can't even speak Spanish, yet you goof around in Cancun and get arrested, disrupting my work.
Ugh.
It seemed they finally understood the gravity of their actions as they hung their heads in shame. The sight of two adults scolded by a woman might have been amusing to passers-by who laughed as they watched. But my anger was far from subsiding. So I'm getting a divorce from you, Tony. No objections. Got it?
Ugh.
After bailing you two out of jail, I think I deserve a free and clear life as thanks. Right?
Yes.
Tony hesitated, but perhaps deeply reflecting on his actions, he replied in a low voice. Tony initially applied for a 4-day vacation, but due to the arrest and lost passport, he significantly overstayed his return date. Without a smartphone, he couldn't contact work to extend his leave. It seemed Tony had completely forgotten about his job amid his personal troubles. Moreover, he hadn't shared information about his current projects with anyone, intending to take all the credit for the big assignment. Missing a crucial meeting and not contacting the other party led to the termination of their business dealings. Despite the circumstances, Tony's unexcused absence and significant loss to the company resulted in his dismissal. Alyssa, furious about the situation, had a major argument with Tony. Essentially, she had quit her job and moved in as a housekeeper. But eventually, Tony divorced me and resigned from his job. With no breadwinner, the house where they lived became a battleground for daily arguments. I know all this because Katie, Alyssa's daughter, kept me informed.
They say you can't choose your parents, but if I could, I'd definitely choose you over Mom, Cindy.
Though the divorce meant I was no longer Katie's aunt, she still reached out occasionally to discuss job prospects or her love life. While we weren't close before, she now looked up to me like a sister, which made me happy. I continued to work in Cancun. I had planned to return to the US after 2 years, but with no need to go back, I decided to continue working here. I've also developed a good relationship with a local man. All the bad memories are washed away by Cancun's beautiful sea, and I'm focusing on being happy moving forward.
Either you leave now, or we both leave together when I set fire to this lying hell, I said, holding up the lighter closer to Derek's prized photographs. He stared at me as sweat trickled down his forehead. You wouldn't dare. The room felt like it would explode. Derek sat on the edge of the couch, his usually neat hair disheveled. His eyes darted from me to the flame and back. There was an urgent, almost desperate edge to his voice. "Laura, this is ridiculous. Put that down." My hand trembled, but I kept the lighter steady. "Ridiculous? You think this is ridiculous? What's ridiculous is you spending our money on someone else while claiming we're broke." He blinked rapidly, searching for the words. "What are you talking about? Where's this coming from?" "The box, Derek. The one you thought you hid so well in the closet. Receipts for gifts, dinners, everything. All for someone named Emily." For a moment, Derek was silent. His face changed, hardening in a way that poured ice into my veins. "Laura, you don't understand. There are things, it's not what you think." Using my free hand, I pulled out the receipts, throwing them at him. They fluttered down like a damning rain. "Tell me, Derek, what do I not understand? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear." Derek sighed, standing and walking towards the door. For a moment, I thought he was going to leave. "Look, let's talk about this rationally. No need for threats or violence." "Rational? You want rational?" I laughed, a harsh sound in the tense room. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and now you want to talk?" He held up his hands as if trying to calm a wild animal. "Listen, we can figure this out. Put down the lighter and we can—" I cut him off. "Or we can what? Pretend everything's fine? Keep lying to each other." I felt my resolve waver and took a deep breath, steadying myself. "No, Derek, I'm done pretending." His cool demeanor cracked for a second, showing just a hint of fear. "Fine, you're right, I messed up, but can we please talk about this?" I lowered the lighter slightly but kept my eyes locked onto his. "Talk? Yeah, we'll talk, but not here, not now." Derek took a step forward, cautiously. "What do you want, Laura? This is getting out of hand." I turned and grabbed my bag, stuffing it with whatever important documents I had tucked away. "I want out. For good. And you're going to let me go without a fight." He moved closer, standing just a few feet away. "And if I don't," I met his gaze, unblinking, "then you'll wish you never met me." There was a silence, thick with unspoken threats and broken promises. Derek exhaled and looked away, defeated. "Fine. Just put the lighter down. We'll talk." I didn't trust the softness in his voice, but I nodded and put the lighter in my pocket. "Okay, but remember, Derek, I've got proof. Proof of everything. Don't test me." His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I saw the man I once loved buried under layers of deceit and betrayal. I wouldn't dare. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving behind the shattered pieces of a life I once thought was perfect. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt the weight of freeing myself and the immense challenge ahead, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. As I left the house, the cold air hit me, snapping me into reality. I got into my car and drove aimlessly for a bit, my mind swirling with thoughts of betrayal and anger. I remembered how things used to be, how Derek used to make me laugh, how we used to plan our future together. It felt like a different lifetime. It was late when I pulled up to Sophia's house. I almost didn't want to disrupt her family, but I had no other place to go. I knocked softly, and moments later, Sophia opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Laura, what are you doing here?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I need to talk. Can I come in?" I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped aside, letting me in. We sat on her couch with the soft hum of the baby monitor in the background. I told her everything, from the hidden receipts to confronting Derek. Her face grew angrier with each detail. "That jerk! I can't believe he did this to you. How long has this been going on?" Sophia's eyes were blazing with protectiveness. "A year, maybe more," I said, feeling the weight of the betrayal more heavily now. "And I think it's been going on since a year into our marriage." Sophia clenched her fists. "You need to get evidence. Solid proof. Have you checked his phone, emails, anything?" I sighed. "I found a hidden phone in his office earlier. It's filled with messages to Emily. That's how I know her name." She reached for her phone. "You need to gather all the evidence you can. Make sure he can't deny it. Then we'll figure out your next steps." I nodded. Sophia's determination was infectious. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're stronger than you think, Laura. We'll get through this together." The next day, I pretended nothing had happened. Derek avoided me, his gaze cold and distant. That night, With Derek snoring in the next room, I snuck into his office. I found the hidden phone and quietly scrolled through the messages. They were worse than I'd imagined: romantic getaways, expensive dinners, even plans for a future together. My blood boiled. One message caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow at the usual place. XO Emily." I decided to follow him. The next day, I watched him drive to a fancy restaurant, meeting a younger woman, Emily. I took countless pictures through the window, each click of the camera deepening my resolve. Later, I sat in my car, the weight of my findings settling over me. I couldn't confront him now. Not yet. There was still more to uncover. Days passed, and Derek continued his deceitful routine, blissfully unaware of my silent pursuit. I documented everything, gathering enough evidence to topple his world. One night, as Derek went out again, I sat across from Sophia with all my gathered evidence spread out before us. "This is it," I said, my voice firm. "I've got enough proof now." Sophia looked at me, admiration in her eyes. "So what's your plan?" I took a deep breath, feeling the cold sting of determination. "First, I need a lawyer. Someone who can guide me through this mess without Derek suspecting. I won't go down without a fight." Sophia nodded. "I know someone. David. He's tough and discreet. He'll help you." I leaned back, exhaustion mingling with relief. "Thanks. I'm ready to fight back now." As I left her house that night, I promised myself I wouldn't let Derek's betrayal define me. This was just the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life. No more living in the shadows of lies. It was time to take control. David was the perfect choice. When Sophia introduced us, he got straight to the point. "So tell me everything, Laura. Leave no detail out," he said, sitting across from me in his cramped office. We spent hours going through every piece of evidence I had gathered. He nodded approvingly as I laid out the photos, messages, and receipts. "Good job documenting everything. This will be crucial," David said, shuffling the papers. "But we need more than just proof of his affair. We need to expose his financial abuses, too." I took a deep breath. "I've been looking into our finances. Derek has been hiding debt, spending money recklessly while keeping me in the dark. I've been the main financial supporter without even realizing it." David frowned. "And you've sacrificed your own career goals for his, right?" I nodded, memories of missed opportunities and neglected dreams flashing through my mind. "Yes, I put everything on hold for him, believing his promises." David looked grim. "We need bank statements and any financial records you can find. He can't deny hard evidence." That night, while Derek was asleep, I tiptoed to his office. I rummaged through his desk drawers, finally finding a locked box. Using the key I had swiped earlier, I opened it to find stacks of bills, credit statements, and loan forms. My heart sank as I realized just how deep Derek's financial mess went. The next day, I handed everything over to David. He sorted through the documents, shaking his head. "This is going to demolish him, exactly what we need." At home, Derek became more distant and dismissive. One evening, I ventured to talk about our financial situation. "Derek, we need to talk about our money issues. Things don't add up," I said calmly. He glared at me, annoyed. "I handle the finances, Laura. Just focus on your work, all right?" I stared at him, anger bubbling just below the surface. "I think I have a right to know, considering my income basically funds everything." His eyes flashed with irritation. "God, Laura, must you always question everything? Leave it alone." I clenched my fists under the table. "If you'd been honest, I wouldn't have to." The argument ended with Derek storming out, leaving me feeling both angry and justified. This only strengthened my resolve to bring everything to light. A week later, David found me taking a break from work. "You've done well, Laura. We're ready to confront him. My suggestion, tomorrow." I felt a surge of determination. "Fine, let's do it." Later that night, I went through everything one last time. I visualized the moment I would lay it all out in front of him, each lie crumbling like a house of cards. The next evening, Derek walked in, his tie loose, looking exhausted. He barely acknowledged me as he sat down. I stood up, holding the stack of evidence. "We need to talk." "Now," I said firmly. He looked up, bored. "What is it now? Another one of your baseless accusations." I slammed the stack onto the table. "No, Derek. These are facts." Derek's face turned pale as he glanced at the documents. "What is this?" "Proof of everything. Your affair, your lies, your financial mess. It's all here." He snatched the papers, flipping through them. His face contorted with anger. "You've been spying on me?" Yes, I said calmly, and now everyone will know the kind of person you really are. His eyes burned with fury. You think you can ruin me? I won't go down without a fight, Laura. I met his glare, unflinching. Neither will I. As I walked away, I felt an immense sense of relief. This was just the beginning, but I was ready for the battle ahead. Derek's control over me was over, and my plan was in motion. It was time to reclaim my life. I could barely sleep. The showdown with Derek left me restless and tense. David assured me our next step was crystal clear. We've got him cornered, Laura. Now's the time to confront him with everything we've got. The next morning, I prepared myself. I was ready for the final talk. When Derek came home that evening, the tension between us was electric. He knew something was off. Laura, what's with the cold shoulder? We need to clear the air, he said, trying to sound reasonable. But I saw through him. We do, I replied, holding up the investigator's report David had handed me. And I've got all the proof I need. He narrowed his eyes, suspicion creeping into his gaze. What are you talking about? I hired a private investigator. I have photos of you with Emily spending our money like it's water. And there's more, details on your financial irresponsibility, I said, keeping my voice even though my heart was pounding. Derek's face twisted with anger and disbelief. You had no right to do that. I had every right, I shot back. You've been lying and cheating for years. This is your mess, Derek, not mine. He lunged forward, grabbing the report from my hands and slamming it on the table. You think this will destroy me? Think again, Laura. I stood my ground. This is your doing. You broke us. I'm just making sure you can't deny it. His eyes turned cold. You want to leave? Fine, but you won't get a penny from me. I laughed, a hollow sound in the stifling room. You really think you can bully me into staying? I've already taken steps to secure what's mine. He sneered. You think you're so clever, but you're just playing a dangerous game. Maybe, I said, grabbing my bag, but I'm done being afraid of you. I turned to leave, but Derek grabbed my arm. This isn't over, Laura. You can't just walk away from everything. I pulled free and faced him. Watch me, I replied, venom in every word. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. Outside, the cool air felt like freedom. I drove to David's office, where we finalized the plan. I outlined every detail with a steady hand, making sure each move was calculated to perfection. We're in this together, Laura, David said, his tone reassuring. You're doing the right thing. The next day, I started extracting my money from our joint accounts. I set up separate accounts in my name, ensuring Derek couldn't touch a dime. Over the next few days, I discreetly moved the majority of our savings. Derek started to sense something was up. He became more demanding, checking our accounts, questioning me constantly. But I stayed calm, playing along. The money's safe, Derek. You need to trust me, I would say, my face betraying nothing. Finally, the day came when the balance tipped in my favor. With the help of David and Sophia, I had everything I needed. I was financially independent, and Derek had no idea how close he was to losing everything. I called a meeting with Derek, Sophia, and David present. Derek strutted in, confidence masking his unease. What's this about? I laid out the accounts, the statements, every transaction he thought he'd hidden. This is about your lies catching up to you. He glanced at David, then back at me. You can't do this. Watch me, I said calmly. David stepped forward. Legally, Laura's in the clear. You've been dishonest, Derek. Now you face the consequences. Derek's face fell, fury and fear battling for control. You'll regret this, he spat, but there was no power behind his words. No, Derek, I replied, standing tall. You're the one who'll regret it. As I left with Sophia and David by my side, I felt the weight lifting. This was far from over, but I was ready. Derek's control was shattered, and I was finally free to reclaim my life. The first steps had been taken, and I wouldn't stop until I saw this through to the end. I moved into Sophia and John's guest room the next day. They insisted I stay as long as I needed. Derek's threats from the previous night echoed in my mind, but I refused to let them shake me. Sophia was a rock of support. One morning over coffee, she said, Laura, you're doing amazing, but you need allies. People who can support you both emotionally and practically. I know, I replied, sipping my coffee. But who do I turn to? Derek made sure to isolate me. Sophia leaned in. We'll start with family and close friends who can offer real help. People you trust. That night, we called my older brother Mike and explained everything. He met us at a local diner, his face a mask of concern and anger. "Laura, I had no idea it was this bad," Mike said, gripping my hand tightly. "You should have told me sooner." "I didn't want to worry you," I said, tears in my eyes. "But I need your support now more than ever." Mike's expression hardened. "You have it. Anything you need, just ask." Next, I reached out to a few trusted friends. Over the following days, Sophia, John, Mike, and I formed a small but solid support network. They helped me with everything from logistics to emotional encouragement. Meanwhile, David and I were busy making final preparations to secure my independent financial stability. I transferred more funds into my private account, ensuring I had enough to start fresh once I left for good. One evening, Sophia came into the guest room with a smile. "John and I have been talking. You should come stay with us until you get back on your feet. We have plenty of room." I shook my head, touched by their generosity. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," John said, appearing in the doorway. "We're family, and you need a stable place to stay." I hugged them both, feeling grateful. "I'll stay, but I don't want to be a burden." "You're never a burden," Sophia said firmly. "We'll get through this together." David called later that week with good news. "Laura, we've made significant progress. Financially, you're secure. Now it's time to ensure Derek feels the consequences of his actions." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious. "We need to expose him in a way that leaves no room for him to deny or twist the truth. Make sure everyone knows who he really is." A plan started to form in my mind. A way to reveal Derek's betrayal to our entire social circle. "An anniversary party," I said slowly. "A surprise anniversary party where I can show everyone the truth." David chuckled. "That's bold, but it could work. Let's do it." We set the date and made meticulous plans. Invitations went out secretly, and on the night of the party, Sophia and John helped me set everything up at their place. The house was filled with friends, family, and Derek's colleagues. Derek arrived, surprised and pleased by the unexpected celebration. He glanced around, probably thinking he had managed to win me back without even trying. He gave his usual charming smile, oblivious to the storm about to hit. As the night went on, I excused myself to prepare the final pièce de résistance to the visitor. With everyone gathered in the living room, I stood up, holding a glass of wine. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate," I began, my voice steady. "Derek and I owe you an honest look at our relationship." Derek looked confused, but he didn't suspect anything yet. I clicked a remote, and the slideshow began. Images and messages flashed across the screen, detailing his affair and financial deception. Gasps filled the room. Derek's face turned ashen as he tried to stand, but John blocked his way. "Stay," John said quietly but firmly. As the final image lingered on the screen, a message from Derek to Emily about their future together, Derek's colleagues and our friends turned to him, their expressions filled with shock and disgust. "Derek," I said, breaking the heavy silence, "this is the truth. This is who you are." Derek's mask finally fell. He looked around, realizing the depth of his unraveling. "Laura, you can't do this." But I held my ground, surrounded by my newfound allies. "Oh, but I did." The room buzzed with whispers, and I saw Derek's reputation crumble before my eyes. This was just the beginning of his downfall, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the anniversary party left a chasm that Derek couldn't ignore. Back at home, his fury exploded. "How could you do this to me?" he screamed, his face red with rage. "You've ruined everything." I stood my ground, nerves steely. "I showed everyone the truth, Derek. You ruined everything yourself." "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he sneered. "You've got nothing without me." "You're wrong. I have everything I need now." I leaned in, my voice low and cold. "And you? You have nothing left but shame." He lunged, and for a second I thought he'd hit me. But he stopped short, his hands clenching and unclenching. "This isn't over, Laura. You'll pay for this." "We'll see," I said, stepping away. "I'm leaving, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The next day, I moved the rest of my belongings to Sophia and John's place. Derek tried calling, texting, even showing up at their door, but John was always there to send him packing. David delivered more good news soon after. "Derek's reputation is in shambles. He's losing clients fast. Word spreads quickly." I nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. "Good." With Derek destabilized, I contacted Emily. She needed to know the kind of man she was involved with. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. Emily was younger than I expected, with wide eyes that betrayed her nerves. "Why are we meeting?" she asked tentatively. I took a deep breath. "You need to hear this. Derek isn't who he says he is. He's been cheating on me a long time, lying to both of us." She looked stunned. "What?" "No, Derek said he and his wife were having problems." "Yeah, because he caused them," I said, handing her a file David had helped me prepare. "Read this. It's all the evidence of his deceit." She flipped through the file, her expression shifting from shock to disgust. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," I replied softly, "but you deserve to know the truth and to decide what to do with it." Emily looked up, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me. I need to cut ties with him." "Be careful," I warned. "Derek's not just a cheater. He's dangerous when cornered." Emily nodded. "I'll end it. Thanks for opening my eyes." Days later, as I began rebuilding my life, word came that Emily had left Derek. Derek's spiral deepened. No girlfriend, no reputation, no support. David's updates confirmed Derek's decline, each piece of news like a weight lifting off my shoulders. One afternoon, I met with David and Sophia. "What's next?" I asked. David smiled. "You've done more than enough damage. Now, it's about securing your future." Sophia leaned in, her gaze intent. "You need to move out of the shadow of this mess. Start fresh." I nodded, determination burning in my chest. "I'm ready." The next day, I began packing my things, preparing to move into a small, cozy apartment I had secured. It was a new start, a space that was mine alone. Derek tried reaching out once more, showing up at the apartment just as I was unpacking. "Laura, please, let's talk," he pleaded, looking broken. I met his eyes with a hard stare. "There's nothing left to say. Leave before I call the police." He stood there, desperation in his eyes. "I'll fix this, I promise." "You had your chance, Derek. It's too late." He left. Shoulders slumped, the full impact of his downfall finally sinking in. Watching him walk away, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and triumph. As I settled into my new place, I focused on my future. I reconnected with my passions, old friends, and embraced the solitude. Life was different, and it was mine to shape. One evening, as the sun set behind the cityscape, I looked around my new home, feeling a profound sense of peace. No more lies, no more fear, just freedom and the promise of new beginnings. Walking down the street, I felt lighter, more confident. Derek's shadow no longer darkened my path. This was my journey, and it had only just begun. Derek's life was unraveling fast. Without my financial support, his house of cards collapsed. Rumors of his infidelity and financial deceit spread like wildfire, reaching his clients and colleagues. One day, I ran into an old acquaintance, Sarah, at a cafe. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Laura, it's been ages." We chatted briefly before she leaned in, her expression turning serious. "I heard about Derek. Is it true?" "Every word," I said, not holding back. "He lied, cheated, and drained our finances. I had to expose him." Sarah shook her head, sympathy in her eyes. "What a mess. I'm so sorry, Laura." "It needed to happen," I replied. "I'm rebuilding now, focusing on myself." She smiled. "Good for you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." It wasn't long before Derek hit rock bottom. One evening, David called with an update. "Derek's been let go from his job. His colleagues lost all respect for him." "He deserves it," I said, feeling a grim satisfaction. "What's next for him?" David sighed. "He'll likely try to find new work, but with his reputation, it won't be easy." I nodded, thinking about how far I'd come. "Thanks, David. I appreciate everything you've done." As days turned into weeks, Derek's desperation grew. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Laura, it's Derek," his voice cracked, full of vulnerability. "I need your help." "No, you don't," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You need to face the consequences of your actions." "Please," he begged. "I've lost everything. I can't do this alone." "You did this to yourself, Derek," I said firmly. "Goodbye." With a click, I ended the call. I felt a mixture of pity and relief. Derek had to learn the hard way that actions have consequences. Emily reached out to me as well, saying she had cut all ties with Derek. "I'm so sorry for being part of this," she said softly. "I didn't know." "It's not your fault," I reassured her. "Derek was the manipulator. You deserve better." She thanked me, and we parted ways, both of us seeking new beginnings. As for me, I threw myself into my work and hobbies. I reconnected with old friends, spending weekends exploring the city and enjoying simple pleasures. Life felt lighter, freer. One evening, I hosted a small dinner party at my new apartment. Sophia, John, Mike, and even David came. The air was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the tension and deceit I had lived with. Sophia raised her glass. To Laura for her strength and courage. May this be the beginning of a beautiful journey. We all clinked our glasses, and I felt a surge of gratitude. These people, my true family, had stood by me through the toughest times. As the party wound down, David pulled me aside. "You've done something incredible, Laura. You've taken back your life." "I couldn't have done it without all of you," I said, glancing around the room at my loved ones. "Thank you." He smiled. "Here's to moving forward, then." In the days that followed, I saw Derek once more. He was a shadow of his former self. Sitting alone in a cafe, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. Part of me wanted to offer solace, but I knew it wasn't my place. Instead, I walked past, my head held high. This was my story now, free from his toxic influence. With renewed strength and an open heart, I embraced my independence. Each step I took was a reminder of my journey, from betrayal to empowerment. Life was mine to shape, and I was determined to make every moment count. I had faced darkness and emerged stronger, ready to build a future filled with light and possibility. As I continued on my path, I knew one thing for sure. I was unstoppable. Moving into my new, cozy apartment felt like stepping into a fresh chapter of my life. I decorated it with pieces that reflected my taste, each detail carefully selected. A sense of peace settled in, a stark contrast to the chaos that had dominated my world. One morning, while brewing coffee, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old friend, Rachel. "Hey, Laura, just heard about everything. Can we catch up? Lunch?" I smiled, glad for the reconnection. "Sounds great. Let's meet at the bistro by the park." At lunch, Rachel listened intently as I recounted the betrayal and the fallout. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Wow, Laura, that's intense. How did you manage?" "With a lot of help. My friends and family were my support system," I replied, warmth flooding my chest as I thought of them. "And now, I'm just focusing on living the life I want." Rachel grinned. "Good for you. You always had a fire in you." Reconnecting with old friends became a regular part of my routine. Each meeting brought laughter, memories, and a sense of healing. I was rebuilding, piece by piece. One day I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Laura, it's Emily." "Emily, is everything all right?" I asked, surprised. She took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say thank you, Senior, for showing me the truth about Derek. It was hard, but I've moved on, started a new job, meeting new people." "That's wonderful to hear, Emily. You deserve happiness." "You too, Laura. Take care," she said before hanging up. Hearing Emily's progress felt like another weight lifted. The threads of Derek's deceit were finally unwinding, freeing us both. My freelance web development business began to flourish. I took on projects that excited me, each one a step toward professional fulfillment. The freedom to choose made all the difference. One afternoon, as I was finalizing a project, there was a knock on the door. It was David, holding a bottle of wine. "Thought we'd celebrate your newfound independence," he said with a smile. We sat on the balcony, the city skyline glowing as the sun set. "So, Laura, how does it feel to be here after everything?" I sipped my wine, feeling the cool breeze. "It feels freeing. I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until it was gone." David nodded. "You've come a long way. What's next for you?" "I'm focusing on me now, my work, my passions, maybe even travel once things settle." He raised his glass. "Here's to new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass with his. As the months passed, I explored old interests and discovered new ones. I took up painting, joined a book club, and even tried my hand at cooking exotic recipes. Life was full, vibrant. One evening, while shopping for groceries, I bumped into an old colleague, Marcus. We chatted briefly, catching up on life. He mentioned a new tech startup looking for experienced developers. "You'd be perfect for it, Laura. Interested?" I smiled, feeling a spark of excitement. "Send me the details. I'd love to know more." Opportunities seemed to unfold naturally, reflecting my new mindset. I was no longer bound by fear or betrayal. I was free to chase my passions and dreams. Sophia and John remained close, often hosting dinner parties that filled my weekends with joy and laughter. One evening, as we sat around their dining table, Sophia leaned over and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Laura. You've rebuilt yourself from the ground up." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a swell of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you all." Walking home that night, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The streets were quiet, the city lights casting a warm glow. I had taken back my life, turned pain into strength, and embraced a future full of possibilities. As I stepped into my apartment, I looked around, smiling. This was my sanctuary, a symbol of my resilience. My journey had been tumultuous, but it led me here, to a place of peace and empowerment. This was my life now, authentic, self-defined, and filled with hope. I walked confidently into the future, knowing I was unstoppable. As I stood in our living room, watching Richard pace, a sense of dread washed over me. This was the morning we were supposed to embark on our 30th anniversary trip, a journey that promised to rekindle the flame in our marriage that had been flickering out over the years. But Richard, my husband of 3 decades, was a picture of anxiety and distance, not the excited partner I had expected. "Richard, is everything okay? You seem preoccupied," I asked, my voice laced with concern. It was unlike him to be so distracted, especially today. He stopped pacing and turned to me. His eyes, once a source of warmth and comfort, now evaded mine as if hiding a painful secret. "Elaine, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice devoid of its usual tenderness. "I can't make the trip. Something urgent has come up at work, and I need to handle it." The words hit me like a cold wave. "On our anniversary? Can it wait?" I couldn't mask the disappointment in my voice. This trip was more than just a vacation. It was supposed to be a new beginning for us. Richard's response was curt, a sharp contrast to his normally considerate demeanor. "Business doesn't wait. You know how it is," he said almost mechanically. "But we've been planning this for months, Richard. Can it be postponed?" I pressed on, hoping for some indication that he shared my disappointment. "It's not negotiable, Elaine." His tone was firm, leaving no room for discussion. "I expect you to understand." Understand? How could I? I watched in silence as Richard hurriedly grabbed a few essentials and left, the door closing with a finality that felt symbolic. The man who had promised to grow old with me was now a stranger, his actions shrouded in mystery. Once alone, my mind raced with confusion and suspicion. This wasn't like the Richard I knew. The man who once couldn't wait to spend time with me now seemed to find any excuse to be away. Determined to unearth the truth, I went to our bedroom and started searching through his things. It was unlike me to pry, but the gnawing doubt left me no choice. Then, amidst his neatly folded shirts and socks, I found it, a small, crumpled receipt from a high-end jewelry store. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, revealing an expensive purchase made just a week ago. A necklace, luxurious and elegant, and certainly not for me. I hadn't received a gift from Richard in years. My heart raced as I pieced together the painful puzzle. Richard was having an affair. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Betrayal, anger, sadness. I realized I couldn't let this pass unchecked. Richard had to answer for his deceit, and I was going to make sure of it. The trip might have been canceled, but my journey to confront the truth and demand accountability from the man I thought I knew had just begun. The house felt eerily silent after Richard left. I sat at the dining table, the crumpled receipt from the jewelry store in front of me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was not the first sign of Richard's infidelity, but merely the latest in a series of subtle changes I had been too naive to acknowledge. I thought back to the late nights he claimed were spent at work, the sudden weekend meetings, and the decreasing number of calls he made to check in on me. Each memory was a piece of a jigsaw puzzle I had refused to complete until now. Armed with a resolve hardened by betrayal, I decided it was time to take action. I couldn't confront Richard without solid proof. I needed to know more, to understand the extent of his deception. My first step was to call the jewelry store. Disguising my voice, I inquired about the necklace on the receipt. The salesperson, eager to help, confirmed that the piece was indeed purchased by Richard, and he had mentioned it was a gift for someone special. My heart sank at those words. Next, I turned to Richard's phone records. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but the trust that once held our marriage together had already been shattered. Scrolling through his call history, I saw numerous calls to a number I didn't recognize, often late at night or early in the morning. I jotted it down, my mind racing with anger and hurt. The following day, I followed Richard. I felt like a character in a cheap detective novel, but desperation drove me. I watched from a distance as he met with a young woman, half his age, at a cafe. They laughed and talked with a familiarity that twisted the knife in my heart. I took photos as proof, each snapshot a testament to his betrayal. That evening, when Richard returned home, acting as if nothing was amiss, I confronted him. "Richard, who is she?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked at me, confusion clouding his face. "Who are you talking about, Elaine?" "Don't play dumb, Richard. The woman you were with today, the one you bought the necklace for." I threw the photos on the table in front of him. Richard's face went pale, but he quickly regained his composure. "Elaine, you're being paranoid. She's just a colleague from work." "A colleague?" I scoffed. "I'm not a fool, Richard. I've seen the way you two are together. It's clear you're having an affair." Richard's expression hardened. "You've been spying on me? Invading my privacy?" "Yes, I have. Because you've been lying to me. How long has this been going on, Richard?" He averted his gaze, his silence confirming my suspicions. Rage and disappointment battled within me. This was the man I had built a life with, and he was treating our marriage like it was nothing. "I want the truth, Richard. I deserve that much," I said, my voice breaking. Richard finally met my gaze, his eyes cold and detached. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing her. It started a few months ago. Happy now?" His words were like daggers, each one piercing through the remnants of the trust and love I had for him. I felt a surge of anger, but beneath it there was an overwhelming sense of betrayal. "How could you do this to us, Richard, to me?" My voice trembled, barely containing the hurt. "Was our marriage, our life together, just a joke to you?" Richard sighed, a mixture of frustration and indifference. "It's not that simple, Elaine. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I challenged, fighting back tears. "Make me understand why you threw away 30 years for a fling." He shrugged, his nonchalance fueling my anger. "Things change, Elaine. People change. What we had, it's not the same anymore." I stared at him, incredulous. This was not the man I married, not the partner I had loved and trusted. He was a stranger wearing Richard's face. "Is that all I get? A cliché? No remorse, no apology?" I asked, my voice rising. Richard remained silent, his lack of response speaking volumes. I knew then that our marriage was beyond repair. The man before me was not the one I had vowed to spend my life with. He had chosen his path, and it was time for me to choose mine. "I want a divorce, Richard," I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Richard looked at me, finally showing a flicker of emotion. "You're serious?" "More than I've ever been. I can't be with someone who has so little respect for me, for what we built together." My decision was firm, born out of pain and betrayal, but also out of a newfound strength. Richard didn't argue. He knew as well as I did that there was no going back from this. That night, I lay in bed, the weight of my decision heavy on my heart. I had lost the man I loved, but in the process, I had found a part of myself that I didn't know existed. A part that was strong, resilient, and ready to face a new beginning. The morning after confronting Richard about his affair, I woke up feeling like I was in the middle of a nightmare. The comfort of our bedroom now felt like a hollow shell of the life we had built together. I sat up, knowing that today was not just another day. It was the day I would start taking control of my life. As I made coffee, the silence of the house was deafening. Richard had spent the night in the guest room, a symbolic distance that spoke louder than words. I knew I had to plan my next steps carefully. It wasn't just about ending my marriage, it was about reclaiming my dignity. When Richard finally emerged, he looked like a man defeated, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a sullen resignation. "Elaine, about yesterday," he began, his voice trailing off. "What about it, Richard? You admitted to your affair. What more is there to say?" I cut him off, not interested in any excuses he might have. I never intended to hurt you," he said, looking down at his feet. I laughed, a bitter, scornful laugh. "You didn't intend to hurt me? What did you think would happen, Richard? Did you think I'd never find out? Or did you just not care?" He didn't answer, and in his silence, I found my resolve strengthening. "You know what, Richard? It doesn't matter. Your intentions don't change what you did. I want a divorce, and I want it as soon as possible." Richard finally looked at me, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Elaine, please, let's talk about this. We can go to counseling. We can try to work this out." "Counseling? Now you want to try?" It's too late for that, Richard. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I could see the realization dawning on him that I was serious. For years I had put his needs before mine, forgiving his shortcomings and overlooking his flaws. But not anymore. Elaine, I'm sorry, he finally muttered. Sorry doesn't change what you did. It doesn't erase the betrayal, I said, my voice steady, even though inside I was crumbling. I spent the day consulting a lawyer and making plans for my future. I was determined to not let Richard's actions define the rest of my life. I would start fresh, no matter how daunting that seemed. That evening, as I lay in bed, I realized that despite the pain and betrayal, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was taking charge of my destiny, no longer a passive player in Richard's deceitful game. For years, I had clung to the hope that our love would prevail, that we would overcome any obstacle. But now I saw the truth. Our marriage was a facade, one that Richard had shattered with his infidelity. As I stared at the ceiling, lost in my thoughts, the door creaked open. Richard stood there, a mix of defiance and desperation in his eyes. Elaine, we need to talk about how we're going to handle this. The divorce, I mean. I sat up, steeling myself. Handle it? You'll hear from my lawyer. That's how we'll handle it. Elaine, be reasonable. Think about what you're doing. We can sort this out without lawyers, without making it messy, he pleaded. Reasonable? I echoed, incredulous. You cheat on me, lie to me, and now you want me to be reasonable? It's beyond that, Richard. You made it messy the moment you decided to betray our vows. He took a step forward, his hands reaching out as if to find some connection, some remnant of the love we once shared. I know I messed up, but we've been together for 30 years. That has to count for something. It did count for something, Richard. It counted for everything, until you threw it away. 30 years, and you decided that wasn't enough, I said, my voice laced with a mix of sorrow and indignation. Richard's face fell, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. So that's it then? You're just going to throw away everything we had? Throw away? No, Richard, you threw it away. I'm just picking up the pieces, I replied, my resolve unwavering. He stood there for a moment as if waiting for me to change my mind, to offer some glimmer of hope, but there was none left to give. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he turned and left the room. Lying in the dark, I realized the enormity of the path ahead. The divorce would be just the beginning. There would be challenges, heartaches, and moments of doubt, but there would also be freedom, a chance to rediscover who I was before Richard, before the lies and betrayal. As I drifted off to sleep, a single thought echoed in my mind. I would not only survive this, I would emerge stronger, forged by the fire of betrayal, and tempered by the resolve to never again be anyone's victim. The days following my decision to divorce Richard were a whirlwind of activity. I met with my lawyer, discussing the best strategy to ensure I came out of this marriage with what I deserved. The hurt from Richard's betrayal still lingered, but it was now accompanied by a burning desire for retribution. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some financial documents, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, hidden amongst bank statements and bills, were receipts and documents for a luxury apartment, one that Richard had rented in the city. Rage boiled within me as I realized that this was where he had been taking her, his mistress. This wasn't just a fleeting affair. He had invested time, money, and effort into this deception. I knew then that my retribution needed to be more than just emotional. It needed to hit Richard where it hurt him the most, his pride and his wallet. With meticulous planning, I began my campaign. I reached out to some mutual friends and subtly revealed Richard's infidelity. I watched as the news spread, tarnishing the reputation he had so carefully built. The man who prided himself on his status in our social circles was now the subject of pity and disdain. But I didn't stop there. I made sure that every detail of our divorce proceedings highlighted his infidelity and financial duplicity. My lawyer, skilled in unraveling complex marital finances, ensured that Richard's hidden assets were brought to light. During one particularly tense meeting, Richard sat across from me, his face a mask of controlled anger. "You're dragging my name through the mud, Elaine. Is this really necessary?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Necessary? Richard, you made a mockery of our marriage. This is the consequence of your actions." He clenched his jaw, his hands forming tight fists. "You're going to regret this. I'll make sure of it." His threat was meant to intimidate me, but I had grown immune to his manipulations. Regret? The only thing I regret is not seeing who you truly were sooner. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Richard's true nature became increasingly evident. He tried to hide assets, dodge alimony payments, and smear my character. But each attempt only strengthened my resolve to see this through, to ensure he faced the consequences of his betrayal. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had won a significant portion of our shared assets, and Richard was ordered to pay a substantial amount in alimony. But more than the financial victory, it was the knowledge that I had stood up to him, that I had not let his betrayal define me, that felt like my greatest triumph. As I walked out of the courtroom, I knew that this was just the beginning of my new life. A life where I was no longer bound to a man who had shown me nothing but deceit. A life where I could finally start to heal and move forward. With the divorce finalized, I found myself standing at the threshold of a new chapter in my life. The sense of liberation was overwhelming, yet daunting. For the first time in years, my future was mine to shape, free from Richard's deceitful shadow. As I began to rebuild my life, I realized that the marriage had taken more from me than I had admitted. My interests, passions, and friendships had been sidelined in my efforts to be the perfect wife to Richard. Now it was time to rediscover Elaine Thompson, the woman before the wife. I started by reconnecting with old friends, many of whom I had lost touch with during my marriage. As I shared my story, I found a network of support and understanding. Their indignation at Richard's actions and their admiration for my strength in facing him gave me a sense of vindication. One evening, over dinner with a group of close friends, the conversation inevitably turned to Richard and the aftermath of our divorce. "Elaine, you really showed him," exclaimed my friend Marissa, her eyes sparkling with a mix of amusement and respect. "He thought he could get away with it, but you turned the tables beautifully." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't let him think he could betray me without consequences. "And the way you exposed his financial secrets. That was brilliant," added another friend, David. "He really underestimated you." Their words bolstered my resolve. I had not only stood up to Richard, but had also exposed him for who he truly was. The community's perception of him had shifted drastically, and he was no longer the respected figure he once was. However, the path to rebuilding my life wasn't just about settling scores with Richard. It was also about finding myself again. I enrolled in art classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. Each stroke of the brush on the canvas was therapeutic, a way of expressing the emotions I had bottled up for years. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding purpose in helping others. It was during these moments of giving back that I felt a true sense of fulfillment, a stark contrast to the hollow life I had lived with Richard. Yet, Richard's shadow still lingered. One afternoon, as I was leaving the art studio, my phone rang. It was Richard. I hesitated for a moment before answering, curious about what he could possibly have to say. "Elaine, we need to talk." Richard's voice came through, a hint of desperation in his tone. "Talk? About what, Richard? The divorce is final. There's nothing left to discuss," I replied, my guard up. "It's not about the divorce. I'm in a bit of a situation," he said, his voice faltering. I paused, a part of me feeling a twinge of curiosity. "What kind of situation?" I've made some bad investments. I'm in financial trouble, Elaine. "Serious trouble," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't help but feel a sense of ironic justice. Richard, who had always prided himself on his financial acumen, now found himself in the pit he had dug for himself. "Richard, your financial issues are no longer my concern. You made your bed," I responded, my voice firm. I know, but I was hoping maybe you could help me out, just temporarily," he pleaded. The audacity of his request took me aback. After everything he had put me through, he had the gall to ask for my help. "Help you? After you cheated, lied, and tried to hide your assets during the divorce? You must be joking," I said, incredulity lacing my words. "I'm serious, Elaine. I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent. I might lose everything," he pressed. "Richard, you lost everything the moment you decided to betray our marriage. I suggest you find another way to solve your problems, I said, ending the call. As I put the phone down, a sense of empowerment washed over me. The Richard who had once controlled and manipulated me was now at the mercy of his own poor decisions. I had moved on, building a life filled with new passions, friends, and a sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, and I knew there would be challenges. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, the architect of my own destiny. Richard was a chapter closed, a painful lesson learned, but also the catalyst for my transformation into a stronger, more independent version of myself. In the months following our divorce, Richard's life seemed to unravel at the seams. The once respected businessman was now a shadow of his former self, his poor choices catching up to him. I heard snippets of his misfortunes through mutual acquaintances, each story a testament to his rapidly declining situation. One day I received an unexpected visit from Richard. He stood at my doorstep, a man defeated. His clothes were disheveled, a far cry from the meticulously dressed Richard Ward once knew. "Elaine, I need to talk to you. It's important," he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated, but eventually led him into the living room. His presence in the house we once shared felt invasive, a reminder of a painful past. "What is it, Richard? I thought we had nothing left to say to each other," I said, my arms crossed. It's about the money I owe," he started, unable to meet my eyes. "I've been drowning in debt. The investments I made, they've gone south. I'm on the brink of bankruptcy." I listened, feeling a mix of vindication and pity. Richard, who had always prided himself on his financial prowess, was now crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. "Elaine, I was wondering if you could lend me some money. Just enough to get back on my feet," he pleaded. The request left me speechless. After everything he had done, he still had the audacity to ask for my help. "Richard, you must be out of your mind. Why would I help you after you betrayed me, after you tried to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine?" I said, the bitterness evident in my voice. "I know I've made mistakes, Elaine, terrible ones, but I'm desperate. I have nowhere else to turn," he said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "Your mistakes were your own doing, Richard. You chose to betray our marriage, to lie, to deceive. You chose to live beyond your means, chasing after a life filled with greed and infidelity. It's not my responsibility to save you from the consequences of your actions," I replied, my resolve firm. Richard's face contorted with a mix of anger and desperation. "So that's it? You're just going to watch me fall? You didn't seem to have any qualms watching our marriage fall apart. You made your choices, Richard. Now you have to live with them," I said, standing my ground. He looked around the room, a room that once symbolized our life together, now a symbol of his downfall. "I never thought it would come to this. I thought I could handle everything." "Thinking you could handle everything was your biggest mistake. You overestimated yourself, and now you're paying the price," I said, the finality in my voice signaling the end of our conversation. Richard stood up, a broken man. As he walked to the door, he turned to me one last time. "I really did love you, Elaine, in my own way. I wish I could believe that, Richard. But love doesn't destroy, doesn't deceive. What you had for me wasn't love." "Goodbye, Richard," I said, closing the door behind him. As I watched him walk away, a part of me felt sorry for the man he had become. But I knew that any sympathy for Richard was misplaced. He was the architect of his own downfall, a man who let his ego and desires lead him down a path of destruction. In that moment, I realized that my journey was not just about overcoming Richard's betrayal. It was about rising above it, about finding strength in adversity. I had not only survived the storm, but I had also emerged stronger, ready to face a future that was entirely my own making. Months passed since Richard's desperate visit, and my life had taken on a rhythm of peace and self-discovery. I had grown accustomed to the solitude and the freedom it brought. However, the last chapter of my story with Richard was yet to be written. One crisp autumn morning, as I tended to my garden, a task that had become a source of joy, I received a call from Marissa. "Elaine, have you seen the news?" Marissa's voice was tinged with disbelief. "No, what happened?" I asked, a sense of apprehension building inside me. "It's Richard. He's been arrested for embezzlement and fraud. It's all over the news," she said. I stood in silence, the phone almost slipping from my hand. The news was shocking, yet somehow it felt like an inevitable conclusion to Richard's self-destructive path. "Are you okay, Elaine?" Marissa asked, concern evident in her voice. I don't know. I need some time to process this," I replied, my mind racing. I spent the day in a daze, reflecting on the entirety of our shared history. Richard, the man I once loved and trusted, had fallen so far from the person I thought he was. His arrest was a stark reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. That evening, as I sat by the fireplace, a sense of clarity washed over me. Richard's downfall was not my doing, but the result of his own choices. I had moved on, building a life that was no longer overshadowed by his deceit. The next day, a letter arrived from Richard. His handwriting was shaky, the words of a broken man. He wrote of his regrets, his mistakes, and his realization of the pain he had caused. He asked for my forgiveness, not expecting redemption, but seeking some solace in his remorse. I read the letter several times, each reading bringing a wave of mixed emotions. In the end, I decided to not respond. Forgiveness was a journey, and I was not ready to embark on it, at least not for Richard. As I moved forward with my life, I found strength in the lessons I had learned. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into a resilience that guided me. I had found a sense of purpose in my passions and a community that valued and supported me. The final chapter of my story with Richard had closed, not with revenge, but with the realization that my happiness and peace were no longer tied to him or his actions. I had reclaimed my life, not as a victim of Richard's betrayal, but as a survivor, stronger and more self-assured. In the solitude of my garden, I found moments of reflection. The blooming flowers with their vibrant colors and resilience reminded me of my journey. Like them, I had weathered storms, but I had emerged more beautiful and robust. My story with Richard was a chapter of my past, a painful lesson in love and trust. But it was also a chapter that forged me into the person I am today, independent, strong, and content in my own skin. As I looked towards the future, I realized that my life was now a blank canvas, ready for new experiences, new joys, and new challenges. I was no longer defined by my past, but empowered by it. I had found a new sense of self, one that was not reliant on anyone else for validation or happiness. Richard's downfall, though tragic, served as a stark reminder of the consequences of living a life driven by deceit and selfishness. It reinforced my belief in living authentically, with integrity and respect for myself and others. In the end, the greatest revenge was not in seeing Richard fall, but in seeing myself rise. I had turned my pain into power, my betrayal into strength. My life was now my own, a beautiful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As I closed the chapter on Richard and our shared past, I embraced the unknown future with open arms, ready to write new stories, create new memories, and live a life filled with purpose and joy.
"You're working late again?" Greg called from the kitchen, his tone dripping with fake concern. I glanced up from my laptop, masking the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "Big deadlines this week," I said casually. He smirked, pouring himself a glass of wine. "You've got to take it easy, Holly. Life isn't just about work, you know." If only he knew. My name is Holly, and for the last 6 months I've been living a double life. Not the glamorous, exciting kind. No, my double life consisted of pretending everything was fine while quietly piecing together evidence of my husband's betrayal. It started with small things: late-night meetings that didn't make sense, charges on our credit card for expensive restaurants I hadn't visited, and a faint whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, but one day, while organizing the mail, I found a receipt for a down payment on a car. A luxury car. That wasn't for me. I confronted him lightly at first, asking about the unusual expenses. Greg, ever the smooth talker, waved it off. "Work perks," he'd said with a grin. "You know how my clients like to celebrate." I wanted to believe him, but something about the way he avoided my eyes told me the truth was far less innocent. So, I started paying attention. It didn't take long to uncover the full picture. Greg wasn't just cheating. He was using our shared savings to fund a lifestyle for Melanie, his so-called client. Expensive dinners, shopping sprees, and the pièce de résistance, the car he planned to present to her as an anniversary gift. The audacity of it all was breathtaking. Here I was, working late nights to secure our future, while he drained our accounts to impress a woman who probably couldn't spell commitment if her life depended on it. But instead of confronting him, I stayed quiet. That night, as Greg settled onto the couch, I opened my laptop and began to plan. I researched fraud reporting procedures, legal options, and even looked up repossession companies. Every keystroke was fueled by a determination I hadn't felt in years. Greg thought he was clever, but he didn't realize he'd underestimated me. If he wanted to play dirty, I was ready to clean house. For the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I laughed at Greg's jokes, asked about his business trips, and even pretended not to notice when he'd come home smelling like an overpriced cologne I didn't buy for him. But behind the scenes, I was building my case. The first step was filing a fraud report. The car was purchased with our joint funds, but the dealership papers only had Greg's name on them, a detail I used to my advantage. I contacted the dealership under the guise of needing more information about the transaction. By the time I hung up, I had everything I needed: dates, amounts, and proof that the purchase had been made without my consent. I followed that up with a call to the bank. "I believe my account has been compromised," I told the fraud department. "There's a transaction I didn't authorize, and it's a significant amount." They flagged the account and opened an investigation. Every step I took tightened the noose around Greg's scheme. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on him. Every time he smirked over his phone or whispered into it like a teenager sneaking a call, I took mental notes. I even managed to catch a glimpse of a text from Melanie. "Can't wait to see the surprise you promised." The surprise? The car, no doubt. The thought made my stomach turn, but it also fueled my resolve. Greg thought he was the master manipulator, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing. I knew how to wait. The anniversary plans came together almost too perfectly. Greg suggested a fancy dinner at one of the restaurants he loved to frequent with Melanie. "I want to treat you right," he'd said, flashing a grin that once made me swoon, but now only made my skin crawl. "Sounds wonderful," I replied, masking my contempt with a sweet smile. I knew what he was doing, using the dinner as a cover to present Melanie with the car afterward, but I wasn't about to let him get away with it. That night, after Greg left for another client meeting, I finalized the details with the fraud investigator. The car's purchase was flagged, and the repossession team was scheduled. Everything was set to unfold just as Greg thought he was winning. As I closed my laptop, I felt a strange sense of calm. For weeks, I'd been quietly carrying the weight of his betrayal, pretending not to notice the lies piling up around me. But now, the power had shifted. Greg had no idea his world was about to collapse. The night of our anniversary dinner arrived, and Greg was in his element. He strolled into the house wearing a sharp suit, holding a bouquet of roses and a bottle of champagne. "Happy anniversary, babe," he said with a grin, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Happy anniversary," I replied, my voice steady, my smile practiced. If he noticed the stiffness in my demeanor, he didn't show it. He was too busy gloating. At the restaurant, Greg spared no expense. He ordered the finest wine, the most extravagant dishes, and even arranged for a pianist to play our song. It would have been romantic if I hadn't known the truth. As he sipped his wine, Greg's phone buzzed. His expression lit up when he read the message, though he quickly tried to mask it. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning curiosity. "Just a work thing," he said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Nothing to worry about." I nodded, biting back a smile. I knew exactly what the message said. Melanie was waiting for her surprise. After dinner, Greg suggested we take a walk. "It's such a beautiful night," he said, slipping his arm around my shoulders. I played along, letting him lead me back to the car. He opened the passenger door for me like the perfect gentleman, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. He was counting the minutes until he could ditch me and deliver his grand gesture to Melanie. Back at the house, I watched Greg check his watch repeatedly, his impatience barely concealed. "I've got to run out for a bit," he said finally, his tone casual. Work emergency. On our anniversary? I asked, tilting my head innocently. It won't take long, he assured me. Just something I need to handle. I smiled sweetly. Of course. Don't let me keep you. As he grabbed the keys and headed out the door, I sat back on the couch, my heart pounding. I could imagine the scene unfolding already. Greg pulling up to Melanie's place, handing her the keys and basking in her adoration, until the repossession team arrived. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Ruiz. Repossession complete. Everything went as planned. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, a mix of relief and satisfaction washing over me. Greg had no idea yet, but his perfect little charade had just come crashing down. And this time, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. When Greg returned later that night, his face was flushed, and his usual swagger was noticeably absent. He slammed the front door harder than necessary, his keys clinking loudly as he tossed them on the counter. Rough night? I asked, glancing up from the book I was pretending to read. He shot me a look, but his words were measured. Just some unexpected complications, he said, pulling at the knot of his tie. Anything I can help with? I asked, my voice dripping with feigned concern. No, he snapped, then quickly softened his tone. I mean, it's fine. Nothing for you to worry about. I bit back a smirk and returned to my book, letting the silence stretch between us. Watching Greg squirm was almost too satisfying, but I wasn't done yet. As he disappeared into the bedroom, muttering something about needing to figure things out, I received another text from Detective Ruiz. Your husband filed a report with the dealership. Claimed the car was taken by mistake. We'll keep you updated. I chuckled softly, imagining Greg's humiliation as he tried to explain the repossession without revealing the fraud. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Greg pacing in the kitchen. He was on the phone, his voice low and tense. I don't care what it takes, he was saying. Just fix it. She's furious, and I can't... He stopped abruptly when he noticed me standing in the doorway. Morning, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He forced a smile. Morning. Just handling some work stuff. Sounds stressful, I said, taking a sip of coffee. Anything I should know about? No, he said quickly, his tone clipped. Nothing you need to worry about. For the rest of the day, Greg was uncharacteristically quiet. He spent hours on his laptop, muttering under his breath and occasionally slamming the lid shut in frustration. I could tell he was trying to salvage the situation, but there was nothing he could do. The fraud report had triggered a full investigation, and the dealership wasn't about to hand the car back without answers. By the evening, Greg's patience had worn thin. Do you ever feel like the universe is just out to get you? He asked suddenly, his tone bitter. Sometimes, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. But I think the universe has a way of balancing things out, don't you? He didn't respond, but the look he gave me lingered a little too long, as if he suspected I knew more than I let on. The cracks in Greg's composure grew more obvious by the day. He was short-tempered, distracted, and constantly on the phone, arguing with someone on the other end. I didn't press him. Instead, I watched and waited, silently enjoying the unraveling of his carefully constructed facade. One evening, I overheard a particularly heated call. Greg was pacing in the living room, his voice low but furious. I told you I'd fix it, he hissed. Just give me a little more time. It's not my fault. These things happen. I could guess who he was talking to. Melanie. I leaned against the kitchen counter, pretending to scroll through my phone, though every fiber of my being was focused on his words. She's overreacting, Greg muttered, clearly trying to calm whoever was on the other end. You don't need to make this a big deal. I'll sort it out. The call ended abruptly, and Greg threw his phone onto the couch, muttering a string of curses. Everything okay? I asked, stepping into the living room with feigned innocence. He looked up, startled, then forced a tight smile. Yeah, just work stuff. Must be tough, I said, sitting down across from him. You've been so stressed lately. Are you sure there's nothing I can do to help? His jaw tightened, but he shook his head. No, I've got it under control. That night, I received another update from Detective Ruiz. The investigation is moving forward. The dealership has corroborated the fraud report. Your husband's activity is under review. I stared at the message, a mix of relief and anticipation coursing through me. The net was closing in, and Greg had no idea. The next morning, Greg's mood hit a new low. He sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, barely touching his coffee. I don't know what's wrong with people these days, he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. Everyone's out for themselves. I almost choked on my coffee but managed to stifle a laugh. Really? What happened? He waved his hand dismissively. Just some setbacks. Nothing for you to worry about. Of course, I said sweetly, hiding my smirk behind the rim of my mug. By the end of the week, Greg was visibly unraveling. His confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a man grasping at straws. As he sat in the living room that evening, typing furiously on his laptop, I leaned against the doorway. You know, Greg, I said casually, sometimes people get exactly what they deserve. He froze for a moment, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before turning to look at me. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged, my expression calm. Just something to think about. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening. Greg had been on edge all day, snapping at everything and everyone. By the time he got a call from Melanie, his carefully maintained mask shattered entirely. I was in the kitchen when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, cursed under his breath, and walked outside to take the call. Curious, I followed quietly, staying just out of sight by the open window. You don't understand, Greg hissed, his voice frantic. It's not my fault. The dealership's claiming fraud, but I didn't... He paused, clearly interrupted by a furious tirade on the other end. I told you I'd fix it, he said, his voice cracking. Do you think I like this any more than you do? Just give me a little more time, Melanie. Her voice was muffled, but her anger was unmistakable. When he finally hung up, Greg stormed back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Everything okay? I asked innocently, glancing up from my laptop as he stormed past. Fine, he snapped, disappearing into the bedroom. Moments later, I heard the unmistakable sound of drawers being yanked open and slammed shut. Curious, I peeked into the room and found him frantically rummaging through his closet, throwing clothes and shoes onto the bed. What are you doing? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Packing, he said shortly. Packing? I raised an eyebrow. Are you going somewhere? Don't start, Holly, he said, his voice tight. I don't have time for this right now. I crossed my arms, watching as he stuffed random items into a duffel bag. What's going on, Greg? You've been acting strange all week. He froze for a moment, his back to me before turning around. It's nothing, he said, his tone sharper than usual. Just a work emergency I need to deal with. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably long. Finally, I smiled. If you say so. As Greg left with his hastily packed bag, I received a text from Detective Ruiz. The investigation is moving fast. Expect more developments soon. I sat on the couch, staring at the door Greg had just walked through, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. He thought he was running to fix things, but the truth was, there was nothing left to fix. By the time he realized it, it would be too late. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to relax. The plan was in motion, and the pieces were falling into place. All I had to do now was wait. And if there was one thing I'd learned over the years, it was how to wait. Monday morning, I woke to a string of missed calls and frantic voicemails from Greg. Holly, call me back, it's urgent. Where are you? I need to talk to you now. They're saying fraud, but it's not true. You've got to help me fix this. I deleted each one without hesitation, savoring the quiet triumph of knowing the tables had finally turned. Over coffee, I texted Detective Ruiz for an update. His reply was swift. Greg tried to contact the dealership this morning. He's panicking, but the fraud investigation has progressed too far for him to undo anything. I smiled to myself, imagining Greg's face as he realized there was no way out. Around midday, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Greg stood on the porch looking disheveled and desperate. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his usual arrogance was nowhere to be found. "We need to talk," he said, his tone pleading. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Talk about what, Greg? The car you bought for your mistress, or the fraud charges you're facing?" His eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. "Holly, I can explain." "No need," I cut him off. "I know everything. The fake business trips, the luxury dinners, the car. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I've known for months." He stumbled over his words, trying to piece together a defense, but I didn't give him the chance. "You used our money to fund your lies," I said, my voice steady. "You betrayed me, and now you're paying the price." He stepped closer, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Holly, please. I messed up, but we can fix this. I'll pay you back. I'll do whatever it takes." I raised an eyebrow. "You'll pay me back? With what? Your empty promises or the love letters from Melanie?" The mention of her name made him flinch, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Before he could respond, I stepped back and gestured to the stack of papers sitting on the entryway table. "You can start by signing these," I said. Greg hesitated, glancing at the documents. "What is this?" "Divorce papers," I replied. "You've already lost the car, and soon you'll lose access to everything else. Consider this your final chance to walk away with whatever dignity you have left." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. For a moment I thought he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. "You don't have to do this," he said weakly. "Yes, I do," I said firmly. "Because unlike you, I know how to finish what I start." Greg left without another word, and as I closed the door behind him, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The man who had taken so much from me was finally out of my life, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The house felt eerily quiet after Greg left, but it wasn't the unsettling kind of silence I'd grown used to during our marriage. This was the peaceful kind, the kind that meant freedom. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the signed divorce papers. Greg had left reluctantly, his pleas still echoing in my mind, but the weight of his betrayal no longer sat heavy on my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt in control. Over the next few days, I started putting my life back together piece by piece. The first step was meeting with my lawyer to finalize the divorce. Clara, ever efficient, was thrilled with how smoothly things were progressing. "With the fraud investigation and the financial evidence we've gathered, he doesn't have much leverage," Clara said, flipping through her notes. "You'll keep the house, your assets, and any remaining funds he hasn't squandered." "And what about the fraud case?" I asked, my voice steady but curious. "That's moving forward as well," Clara replied. "Detective Ruiz has ensured that all the pieces are in place. Greg will be facing charges soon, and given the evidence, it's unlikely he'll avoid jail time." I nodded, the news giving me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. While the legal battles moved forward, I focused on reclaiming the space Greg had tried to overshadow. I rearranged the furniture, replaced the old curtains with ones I'd picked out, and even painted the living room a soft shade of blue, my favorite color, not his. Amanda came over one afternoon to help, armed with paint rollers and a bottle of wine. "This place already feels different," she said as we worked. "It's like you've taken back the energy he tried to drain from it." "That's the goal," I replied with a smile. "I want this house to feel like mine, not a reminder of him." I also started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Greg had always insisted on controlling our social life, dictating who we spent time with and when. Now, I was free to make my own choices. One evening, I hosted a small dinner party with Amanda and a few close friends. As we laughed and shared stories over a meal I'd cooked myself, I realized how much I'd missed this, being surrounded by people who truly cared about me, not the version of me Greg had tried to shape. The investigation into Greg's fraud continued to make progress. Detective Ruiz called me with updates every few days, his tone always professional but tinged with satisfaction. "The dealership is cooperating fully," he said during one call. "Greg's attempts to cover his tracks only made things worse for him. It's a matter of time before we see this through." I thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and validation. Greg had spent years trying to manipulate me, but in the end, he'd only outsmarted himself. As I hung up the phone, I stood in the middle of my freshly painted living room, taking it all in. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like home. The weeks after Greg's departure brought a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The house, once filled with tension and lies, now felt like a sanctuary. One morning, as I sat on the back porch sipping coffee, I opened my notebook and started jotting down plans for the future. For so long, my life had revolved around keeping Greg happy, balancing his whims and smoothing over his mistakes. Now, for the first time, I could focus entirely on myself. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Things I've always wanted to do." The list grew quickly. Redecorate the house, travel to Greece, start my own business, spend more time with friends and family. Each item felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity, one that had been overshadowed by Greg's selfishness for too long. I started small, tackling the first item on the list. With Amanda's help, I transformed the house into a reflection of my style, warm, inviting, and unapologetically mine. We painted the walls in vibrant colors, replaced the furniture Greg had insisted on, and even turned his old home office into an art studio. "This feels like you," Amanda said as we hung a large painting on the living room wall. "It's like the house finally matches the person living in it." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. It's a work in progress, but it's getting there. The next step was rebuilding my career. During my marriage, Greg had discouraged me from pursuing my professional goals, insisting that his ambitions were more important. Now, I was determined to make up for lost time. I reached out to old colleagues and mentors, explaining my situation and expressing my interest in re-entering the workforce. Their support was overwhelming, and within weeks, I had several promising opportunities lined up. One evening, I received a call from a former boss who offered me a consulting position on a project I was passionate about. "We'd love to have you back," she said warmly. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a sense of validation I hadn't realized I needed. "I'm ready." As I settled into my new routine, I began to notice subtle but significant changes in myself. I was more confident, more decisive, and more willing to take risks. The fear and self-doubt that Greg had instilled in me were fading, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, I looked around the house and smiled. This was my life now, messy, imperfect, and entirely my own. A few weeks later, I received a call from Detective Ruiz. "The fraud investigation is officially complete," he said. "Greg has been formally charged and the case will proceed to court in a few months." The news hit me harder than I expected, not because I felt sorry for Greg, but because it symbolized the final unraveling of the life we'd once shared. "Thank you for everything," I told Ruiz, meaning it. Without his guidance, I wasn't sure I would have had the strength to see this through. "Justice takes time," he said simply, "but it's worth it." That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, staring up at the stars. The closure I'd been waiting for was finally within reach, and with it came a strange mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a touch of sadness for the life I'd thought I'd have. Amanda came over the next day, her usual energy filling the house. "You look different," she said, handing me a bag of takeout. "Like a weight's been lifted." "Maybe it has," I replied with a small smile. "Greg's charges are moving forward, and the divorce is almost finalized. It feels like I can finally breathe again. Amanda grinned. You're practically glowing. What's next? I gestured to the notebook on the coffee table. I've been making plans. Travel, work, maybe even a business of my own. I'm finally figuring out what I want, instead of what someone else expects of me. About time, Amanda teased, raising her glass in a toast. Here's to the next chapter. No. In the weeks that followed, I started checking more items off my list. I booked a solo trip to Greece, something I'd always dreamed of but never had the freedom to pursue. The thought of exploring ancient ruins and walking along sunlit beaches filled me with a sense of adventure I hadn't felt in years. At the same time, I dove into my consulting work with enthusiasm, reconnecting with the passion and drive that Greg had tried to stifle. Every step forward felt like a declaration. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of my past or the betrayal I'd endured. One afternoon, as I stood in my freshly redecorated living room, I glanced at the framed photo on the mantel. It was a picture of me and Amanda from years ago, taken long before Greg had entered my life. Looking at it now, I realized something important. I was still that person, the strong, capable woman who knew how to stand on her own 2 feet. Greg hadn't taken that from me, no matter how hard he'd tried. And now I was finally ready to move forward without looking back.